They say grief comes in waves, but for me, it came as an explosion. Silent, sudden, and completely consuming. It started 3 weeks after my father died. I was still reeling from his absence, managing the estate, handling funeral arrangements, making sure my 2 kids didn't feel the full weight of my sadness. My husband, Ian, was helpful enough holding my hand, pouring me tea, offering silent support. Or so I thought. That morning, I found a letter tucked inside one of Dad's old leather-bound journals. It was hidden between pages that hadn't been opened in years. The envelope was unmarked but worn, as if it had been read many times before. The handwriting on the folded paper inside was unmistakable. It was my mother's. Ian and I have loved you in ways neither of us can explain. I know this will hurt, but I hope one day you'll understand. I stopped reading. My vision blurred and my hands trembled. The silence in the kitchen turned heavy, almost menacing. Ian. My Ian. I read the sentence again and again, unable to comprehend what it meant. Was it a metaphor? A mistake? Or something far darker? I stood there motionless, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I felt heat rise to my face, a rush of disbelief and confusion. My name is Clara Whitmore, and up until that moment, I believed I had a good marriage, a quiet, predictable life. Ian and I had been together for nearly a decade. We had 2 beautiful children, a home filled with love, and a rhythm that made me feel safe until that letter tore everything apart. The worst part wasn't just what I had read, it was what I hadn't. The lack of context, the vagueness. It was just a few lines on paper, yet they carried the weight of betrayal, like a gun going off with no warning. I folded the letter and placed it back inside the journal like I hadn't touched it. I didn't know why. Denial, maybe, or fear of what I'd find if I kept digging. That day, I didn't confront Ian. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to ask the question my heart already knew the answer to. Instead, I smiled through dinner, kissed my kids goodnight, and laid in bed next to a man I was no longer sure I even knew. The next morning, I got up before anyone else and went through the box of letters my father had left behind. If there was one secret, there had to be more. I needed to know the truth not just for myself, but for the version of my life I thought was real. And whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. This story, my story, had just begun. The house was still asleep when I sat back down at the dining table, journal in one hand, coffee in the other. My fingers brushed over the stack of old letters my father had kept locked away. Some were yellowed, some crisp. Most were receipts, estate documents, bank statements, but mixed in were envelopes I didn't recognize. No stamps, no postmarks, just names, his, my mother's, and one that made my stomach churn. Ian Whitmore. I opened the first envelope labeled simply June 2005. Inside was a folded note, handwritten in the same delicate cursive I had seen the day before. I can't stop thinking about last night. Every time you touch me, I feel alive again. I froze. That date was nearly 2 years before Ian and I had even met. I read it again and again, as if my brain refused to process the words. Every syllable was a nail, hammering into the life I thought I had. My mother, my husband, long before I ever fell in love with him. Long before our children were even an idea. How long had this gone on? And then came the next letter. Dated 2007, the year Ian and I started dating. She's in love with you. It's written all over her face. Please tell me you'll choose me. I dropped the paper as if it had burned me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a drunken night or an affair that faded. This was an entanglement, one that had lasted years. I felt my chest tighten as if all the air in the room had disappeared. I sat back, letting the numbness wash over me, feeling a kind of betrayal I didn't know existed, not just from Ian, but from my own mother, the woman, who taught me what love was supposed to look like. I thought about the holidays, the dinners, the way they used to glance at each other when they thought I wasn't looking, all those subtle moments I'd brushed off, chalked up to family familiarity. My mother had always adored Ian. Now I saw that admiration in a horrifying new light. And Ian? How many times had he kissed me knowing what he had done? Built a family with me while hiding this grotesque truth? I suddenly felt sick. My hands were shaking too hard to hold the next letter, so I shoved them all into a drawer and slammed it shut. A sound behind me made me spin. Ian was standing in the hallway, rubbing his eyes, still groggy. "You're up early," he said casually. "Couldn't sleep?" I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Something like that," I said, trying to keep my voice level. He smiled and walked over to kiss my forehead, and for a moment I didn't move. His lips brushed my skin like nothing had changed. But everything had. I forced a smile, nodded, and poured him a cup of coffee. He didn't notice the tremble in my hands. He didn't see the fury building just beneath the surface. And he had no idea the letters were no longer a secret. I spent the rest of the morning moving through my house like a ghost. Ian and the kids laughed over pancakes while I stared out the kitchen window, pretending to admire the garden my father had once cared for. I couldn't taste my food. I barely registered the conversations around me. My body was here, but my mind was locked inside those letters, replaying every line like a broken record. I watched Ian more carefully now. The casual way he sipped his coffee, the ease in his voice as he talked about work, the way his hand brushed mine as he passed the butter like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I didn't know if he was still lying or if the betrayal had ended years ago. But I did know one thing. I couldn't confront him until I was sure. I needed to know the whole truth, down to the bone, so I did what I never thought I'd do. I began to spy on my husband. That afternoon, when he went out to run errands, I sat at his desk. It felt invasive, wrong even, but so was the life I was unknowingly living. His laptop was open. No password. He trusted me. The irony was cruel. I opened his email, his downloads, even his chat apps. Nothing unusual. If anything, it was too clean, like he knew someone might look someday. But I wasn't just searching for proof. I was studying his patterns, what he hid, what he erased. Then I opened his cloud drive. Buried in an old folder from 2012, around the time we got married, was a video. I clicked it. It was grainy, low quality, a hotel room. The camera was placed on a desk. In frame I saw him, Ian, young, nervous, sitting on the bed. Then, my mother walked in. She laughed, said something muffled, and kissed him. I slammed the laptop shut so hard it echoed through the room. My entire body shook. I felt a scream building in my throat but didn't let it out. I couldn't. My children were in the next room. I pressed both hands over my mouth and stared at the closed screen like it might explode. It wasn't just a letter. It wasn't just a suspicion. It was real. Everything. All of it. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and collapsed to the floor. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me anymore. My eyes were wild. My lips were trembling. I whispered to myself over and over, "Don't break. Don't break." And then, from the hallway, I heard his voice. "Clara, you okay?" I wiped my face, forced my voice steady, and replied, "Yeah, just not feeling great." I opened the door, and he was standing there concerned, unaware, calm. He reached out, brushing my cheek. "You're pale. Do you want to lie down?" I nodded. He kissed my forehead again, and for the first time in my life, I wished I had never met him. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the living room wrapped in an old blanket, staring at the cold flicker of the fireplace. There was no fire, just shadows. My thoughts raced, looping the same question over and over. How do you confront someone who built your entire life on a lie? I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. Instead, I opened a blank notebook and began to write. Everything I knew. Everything I'd seen. Dates, locations, letters, that cursed video. I had to put it somewhere, outside my mind, because the weight of it all was becoming unbearable. I wasn't just processing betrayal, I was preparing for war. Emotional war, legal war, a war for my own sanity. And for the first time I realized I couldn't let him know I knew, not yet. This wasn't just a broken heart. This was a fracture deep into the foundation of our marriage. And if Ian had lied about something so profound for so many years, what else was he capable of? Could I trust him with the kids? With our finances? With anything? I reached out to an old college friend, Rachel, now a divorce attorney under the guise of catching up. I didn't give her details, just asked vague questions. She told me what to prepare, how to protect myself quietly. Bank records, copies of the house deed, digital backups. It felt dirty, but she reminded me it wasn't paranoia, it was self-preservation. And then, something unexpected happened. My daughter Lily walked in. She rubbed her eyes and climbed onto the couch beside me. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, gently brushing her hair back. She shook her head and rested against my shoulder. "I had a weird dream. You were crying in it." I froze. Kids see more than we think. I held her tightly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just tired." We sat in silence for a while. I stared into the darkness and made a silent promise. No matter what happens next, I will protect them. I will not let my pain become theirs. By the time the sun began to rise, I had a plan. I would gather evidence slowly. I would pretend everything was normal. I would act like the loving wife he believed he still had, while preparing to dismantle the lie from the inside out. I went to bed for an hour, just enough to look rested. By breakfast, I was smiling again. Ian kissed my cheek, asked how I was feeling. I told him I was better. He offered to take the kids to the park to give me some space, something he hadn't done in a long time. I said yes, and as I watched him buckle them into the car, I knew he still thinks I'm in the dark. Let him. The longer he believes that, the more carefully I can unravel this web. Because when I do finally confront him, there will be no escape. The week that followed was a masterclass in pretending. I laughed at Ian's jokes. I packed the kids' lunches. I kissed him goodnight. I even went on a family picnic that Sunday and smiled for every photo. But beneath the surface, every breath I took was soaked in silence, in secrets I hadn't yet spoken. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, because now that the truth had a name, my mother's, I needed more than evidence. I needed answers. Why? When? How long? And perhaps the most dangerous question of all. Was it ever really over? One night, after Ian fell asleep beside me, I reached for his phone. I hadn't touched it before. Something about it always felt sacred, a line I didn't want to cross. But that was before I saw a video of him and my mother in a hotel room, before I found letters that told me my marriage began with betrayal. There was no password on his phone, just like his laptop. The trust he gave me now felt like an insult. I searched texts, deleted messages, even his cloud backups. Nothing. He'd erased everything, or hidden it too well, until I opened his notes app. Most were mundane grocery lists, work reminders until one caught my eye. It was titled simply, Whitmore. My maiden name. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a list. Names, dates, references I didn't recognize at first. But then I saw it. January 12, 2011. Atlanta Whitmore. That was the exact week my mother had gone to a conference. I remembered it because she brought me back a silk scarf I'd worn to graduation. I remember her smiling when she gave it to me. I remember thinking it smelled like hotel soap. There were other dates, other cities, and other names none I knew. I took screenshots, sent them to my encrypted email. Then I turned off his phone and slid it back under his pillow. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing her voice in my head, my mother, telling me years ago that marriage was sacred, that forgiveness was the backbone of love. Had she told herself that after sleeping with her daughter's fiancé? The next morning, I called my aunt, my mother's sister. She was quiet when I asked. Too quiet. Finally, she said, "Clara, your mother always lived two lives, one we saw and one she kept hidden." I loved her, but I never really knew her. That hit me like a freight train, because now I had to wonder, had I inherited that trait? Was I becoming her? A woman living two lives, one with smiles and hand-holding, and another filled with secrets and notebooks full of evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't stop. That day, I made an appointment with a private investigator. I gave him copies of the letters, the screenshots, and the video. I told him I needed everything. Every hotel, every date, every woman. And he looked at me and asked gently, "Are you sure you want to know all of it?" And I answered, "I already know enough to ruin him. Now I want to bury him." 3 days later, the private investigator Marcus sent me an encrypted folder. His message was brief. "You're going to want to be somewhere quiet before you open this." My hands trembled as I clicked. Inside were photos, receipts, scanned hotel ledgers, and one particularly damning spreadsheet. But what struck me hardest weren't the dozens of affairs. He'd discovered it was the timeline. Ian's betrayal hadn't started just before our wedding. It had started before we met. Years of manipulation, grooming, secrets. Some of the women were strangers. Others were acquaintances. One was even a woman I'd once worked with at the publishing house. All of them marked by aliases, subtle cash payments, short hotel stays. He hadn't just cheated. He had constructed a life beneath our life. But the final entry is what shattered me. March 9th, 2022. Boston C. Whitmore. My name. I blinked, confused. Had someone pretended to be me? I opened the attached file and felt my blood run cold. It was an invoice, a hotel reservation. Ian's name was on it along with mine, but I hadn't been in Boston that day. Someone had used my identity. My credit card had been charged. And it wasn't fraud. The reservation had been made through a third-party concierge. Everything was orchestrated. "Marcus," I whispered on the phone, my voice thin. "What the hell is this?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Clara, I think your husband's been preparing for something. Maybe even covering his tracks in case things ever came out." "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's been building a narrative. Fake receipts. Fake emails. It's like, if you ever went public, he could spin it. Make it seem like you were the one cheating." The ground disappeared beneath me. I wasn't just betrayed, I was being set up. And suddenly, so many moments clicked into place. The time my credit card was declined because of suspicious activity. The mysterious calls I'd missed from blocked numbers. The way Ian always seemed so calm, so collected. Even when I was unraveling, he wasn't just careless. He was careful. Dangerously careful. And now I realized I wasn't just dealing with a husband who lied. I was dealing with a man who'd planned for his lies to be uncovered and had laid the groundwork to flip the blame. A predator, a strategist, a man with a plan B. But what he didn't know was that I now had one too. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. The kind of anger that sharpens your mind, stiffens your spine, and makes you see the world not as it is, but as it could be if you had the nerve. Ian had been playing chess while I was still learning the rules. But now, I was ready to flip the board. I started small. I told him I wanted to go away for a weekend. A writer's retreat at a vineyard 2 towns over. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me to enjoy myself. It was almost disappointing how easily he agreed, like he wanted me gone. Exactly what I hoped. The retreat was a lie. I spent those 2 days at my best friend Rachel's house, poring over Marcus's files and planning a strategy. Rachel had always been my rider, the kind of woman who would hold your earrings during a bar fight or your hand during a breakdown. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just asked, "What's the play?" I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted proof. Proof that Ian was setting me up. Proof that would hold in court. Because if he was forging evidence now, what would he do in a custody battle? Or worse, what else had he forged? We needed bait. So I wrote a fake email, a fictional man, a fictional affair, a digital breadcrumb trail leading to a burner account, just enough to catch his attention if he was watching, and he was. Within 48 hours, I got a notification. My fake account had been accessed from an unknown device, an IP address linked to our home network. I looked at Rachel and whispered, "Got him." Now it was my turn. I met with a lawyer the next day. Not just any lawyer, a specialist in high-conflict divorces. She read everything I'd collected, nodded once, and said, "We'll need more." So I planted a second trap. A journal entry left accidentally open on my laptop. A story of guilt and longing, dated back to a fictional weekend in Boston. The same weekend he had forged documents about. That night, Ian found it. I watched him from the hallway as he read. His jaw tightened. He took a picture of the screen with his phone. My stomach twisted not with fear, but with satisfaction. Because the moment he used that photo against me, I could prove it was fake. The journal was time-stamped, encrypted, and written on a locked word processor I only opened for this purpose. Rachel whispered, "It's working." But it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about catching Ian. It was about preparing for war, a war I never asked for, but one I now had no choice but to win. It happened on a Tuesday. I had just gotten home from the grocery store, arms full of paper bags and mind full of tension, when I heard his voice from the living room. "Clara," he called. "We need to talk." My pulse spiked. I walked in slowly, my heart pounding a steady warning against my ribs. He stood near the fireplace, his phone in hand like a judge holding the final piece of damning evidence. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "I saw your journal." I tilted my head. "What journal?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "The one you left open. March 9th, Boston. You lied to me." He finally looked up, eyes burning with disappointment, or rather, the performance of it. He wanted me to panic, to fall apart. Instead, I smiled. "That's interesting," I said, setting the bags down carefully. "Because that journal entry doesn't exist." He frowned. "It was right there." "It's a decoy," I interrupted. "Encrypted, time-stamped, written on a system that logs every keystroke." "Want me to prove it?" Ian froze. I watched it dawn on him. The trap, the setup, the fact that I'd been 2 steps ahead for weeks. He began, but no words followed. Just silence. I stepped closer. "You accessed a fake email from our Wi-Fi. You photographed a fabricated document. You're building a case that doesn't exist, and I have proof of all of it." His face changed. The mask slipped. Not fear, not guilt, but rage. Controlled, calculated. "This won't hold in court," he hissed. "No?" I whispered. "Let's find out." He stormed past me, shoulder brushing mine like a threat. Upstairs, a door slammed. I stood in the center of the room, the echo of that door still ringing in my ears. Rachel texted just then. "Did he take the bait?" I replied, "Swallowed it whole." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen of my laptop, rereading the files. Photos of smiling strangers, receipts from cities I'd never visited. My name, twisted and distorted, used like a tool in his private campaign. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was warfare, but I wasn't scared. I was ready, and for the first time in months, I felt something new bloom inside me. Power. The morning after Ian discovered the trap, the house was quieter than usual. Too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like the air is holding its breath. He didn't speak to me over breakfast, didn't look up from his coffee, just sat there, jaw tight, scrolling on his phone like nothing had happened. But I could feel it, the simmering tension behind his eyes, the wounded pride gnawing at his ego. Good, let it burn. Rachel picked me up that afternoon. We drove to her brother's law office, the one she'd been hinting at for weeks. She said his name was Daniel, that he was sharp, aggressive, and ruthless in court. Exactly what I needed. Daniel was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel. He didn't waste time. "You're dealing with a narcissist," he said after skimming Ian's forged evidence. "Smart, calculated, dangerous." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. And we're going to destroy him. He laid out a plan, fast, brutal, and surgical. File first. Get ahead of him. Present the digital trail of his manipulation. Show the court who he really is, behind the suits and polite smiles. And then, Daniel said something I hadn't expected. "You're not the first woman he's tried this with." My breath caught. What? Daniel slid a file across the desk. Inside were notes, screenshots, emails. Another name, Vanessa Kerrigan. She dated Ian briefly, years before me. The relationship ended abruptly, but not without damage. She'd filed a complaint once: emotional abuse, digital manipulation, falsified messages sent to her employer. It hadn't gone to court, but it was recorded, and now admissible. I felt my hands tremble. This wasn't just a bad marriage. This was his pattern. Back home, I stood outside our front door for a long moment, keys in hand. The house suddenly felt foreign. Every picture frame, every wall, all part of a lie I'd been living for years. I opened the door slowly. Ian stood in the hallway, arms crossed, blocking the path. "Where were you?" he asked flatly. I looked him straight in the eye. "Meeting with someone who knows exactly who you are." He laughed, short, sharp, bitter. "Still playing the victim?" "No," I said softly. "Just finally acting like someone who knows better." That night I moved into the guest room. Locked the door. Sent Rachel a text. "It's starting." She replied instantly, "You're not alone. You've got us. And this time, you've got the truth." For the first time in years, I felt it. A team, a future, and a fight I could finally win. 2 days after my meeting with Daniel, I received a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A formal, embossed envelope. Slid under the door like a declaration of war. Inside was a legal notice. Ian was filing for exclusive ownership of the house, citing financial contributions and emotional instability on my part. I almost laughed. This was his first move, a scare tactic, but poorly timed. We had already filed first, and Daniel had made sure our case included everything: financial records, digital manipulation, and his psychological patterns. Still, seeing it in writing made my stomach twist. That night, I called Vanessa Kerrigan. Her voice was steadier than I imagined, low, almost resigned. We talked for an hour. She told me about how he charmed her, how he gaslit her, isolated her, and tried to ruin her reputation when she left. Everything she said mirrored my story like a shadow from the past. "I wish I had fought back," she said finally. "I didn't have the strength, but you're already doing what I couldn't." I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering how many more Vanessas were out there, each carrying a story buried under shame. The next morning, Ian changed tactics. He began love-bombing me. Fresh flowers on the counter. Coffee waiting when I came downstairs. Soft apologies whispered like poison. "Let's not ruin everything over a misunderstanding," he said, reaching for my hand. I didn't flinch, but I didn't take it either. Instead, I turned to him and asked, "Do you remember the first time you lied to me?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Because I do," I said. "It was the night you said you'd quit smoking. And I found the lighter in your car." He said nothing. "I forgave you then," I continued. And again, for every quiet manipulation, every subtle control. But now I see it wasn't love. It was control disguised as care. He dropped the act then. The soft eyes hardened. "You're going to lose," he said quietly. I smiled. "You already have." That afternoon, I submitted the final set of documents with Daniel. We included Vanessa's statement, Ian's forged files, his Wi-Fi activity logs, and screenshots of every manipulation attempt he made. The case was now real, official, public, and Ian knew it. That evening, I heard the sound of something smashing in his office. A drawer slammed. A bottle shattered. His frustration made the walls shake. But I didn't move. I sat calmly in the living room, sipping tea, as if the storm inside that room couldn't touch me anymore. Because it couldn't. I wasn't his anymore, and every broken sound coming from upstairs was proof of it. A few days before the court date, I took a trip I had been avoiding for years back to my mother's house. She lived alone now, in the small town where I grew up, a quiet neighborhood with white fences and dying rose bushes, the kind of place that never forgot your worst day. When she opened the door, she looked surprised. Not at me, at the version of me that stood there, confident, calm, unshaken. We sat in the kitchen. She poured tea, the same way she always had, as if time hadn't passed and I hadn't been drowning for years, while she pretended not to see. "Ian and I are divorcing," I said simply. She nodded slowly, like she had expected it, but didn't want to be the one to speak it aloud. "I know what he's like," she said finally. That stopped me. I looked up. "You knew?" She folded her hands tightly. "Not everything. But I saw pieces. I saw how you faded, how you stopped laughing the way you used to. Then why didn't you say anything?" Her silence was deafening. And then quietly, she said something I'll never forget. "Because I married a man like him too." Her eyes were glassy, but not from weakness. From rage buried so deep it had fossilized. "He wasn't your father," she continued. "It was before him. When I was your age. He told me I was too emotional, too loud, too dramatic, so I learned to be quiet. And when I saw you do the same, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "I should have warned you," she whispered. But I was too ashamed of what I accepted, of what I survived. Tears burned in my eyes. Not from sadness, from recognition. We were two women separated by decades and choices. But both of us had swallowed the same silence, inherited the same shame. And in that moment, I realized something. Breaking this cycle wasn't just for me. It was for her too. It was for every woman who had ever been told to shrink, herself to fit inside someone else's comfort. I took her hand. "Mom," I said, "you don't have to be ashamed. Not anymore." That night, back home, I stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't see the same woman who used to cry silently in the bathroom, so Ian wouldn't hear. I saw Clara Whitmore, daughter, survivor, fighter. The next day I emailed Daniel the last piece of the puzzle, a personal letter, to be read only if Ian tried to paint me as unstable in court. In it, I detailed the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the silence I endured, and how that silence was learned, not natural. It ended with one line. "I may have been quiet, but I was never weak." The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Everything about it was sterile. The polished floors, the rows of uncomfortable benches, the detached expressions of people who were just doing their jobs. And yet, to me, it was the most personal battlefield I had ever stepped into. Ian was already there when I arrived. He sat with his lawyer, looking calm. Too calm. He gave me that same smug half-smile he used to give when he thought he had won an argument before it even began. But this wasn't our living room. This wasn't behind closed doors. This was public, documented, witnessed. The judge called the session to order. Introductions were made. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken history. Daniel stood and began his opening statement, calm, factual, and devastating. He laid out a timeline, dates, screenshots, bank statements, emails. Evidence that Ian had doctored files, that he had manipulated finances, that he had tracked my movements without consent. I watched Ian's face slowly shift from confidence to tension. Then it was my turn. I was called to the stand. Walking there felt like moving through mud. Every step was heavy with memory. But I stood tall. I had practiced this with Daniel, but now it wasn't rehearsal. Now it was truth. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, "you may begin." And I did. I told them about the isolation. How Ian used kindness like a leash, reeling me back in whenever I tried to pull away. How he twisted my words until I doubted my own memory. I spoke about the day I realized I hadn't laughed in months. About the moment I looked at my reflection and didn't recognize myself anymore. The room was still. Ian's lawyer objected once, maybe twice, but the judge let me speak. Maybe she saw something in my eyes. Maybe she had seen it before. Then came Ian's rebuttal. He denied everything, with ease. He painted me as unstable, overly emotional, dramatic. He even mentioned my family issues, twisting the conversation I had with my mother into something shameful. But Daniel was ready. He stood calmly, then handed the judge a sealed envelope. "My client would like this personal letter to be entered into the record," he said. Permission was granted. The judge read it silently. Then for a moment she looked at me, not as a judge but as a woman. She didn't smile, but she nodded just slightly. And I knew then I had been heard. When the session ended for the day, Ian walked past me. He didn't say a word, but the fear in his eyes, just a flicker, was louder than anything he could have said. For the first time I saw him as small, and it wasn't because I had grown. It was because he had been shrinking me for so long. I had forgotten my true size. Not anymore. 2 days after my testimony, I received an email from Daniel with the subject line, "You need to see this." Attached was a message. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from court. It was from a woman. Her name was Marissa. She had been in a relationship with Ian 5 years before he met me. They had never married. No children, no shared property. But what she described was hauntingly familiar. She wrote about how Ian had isolated her from her friends, how he would buy her gifts after explosive arguments, only to later use those gifts as leverage, how he called her too sensitive whenever she cried, how he convinced her to go to therapy, not for healing but to prove she was unstable, and how, when she finally left, she did it in the dead of night, leaving behind clothes, books, parts of herself. Daniel had already spoken to her. She was willing to testify, not out of revenge but because she had heard my voice in court. She'd read the transcript. And for the first time, she realized she hadn't imagined it all. Someone else had lived it. When we spoke on the phone later that night, our connection was immediate. Not friendship, not pity. Something deeper, something forged in shared survival. "I never thought he'd do it again," she said. "But I should have known. Men like him don't stop, they just change tactics." I was silent for a moment. Then I asked, "How did you heal?" She laughed softly. "I didn't, not fully. But speaking it out loud helped. Being believed helped." The next day in court, Marissa testified. She was calm, measured, not emotional, factual. She told the court how Ian made her feel like she was always one, mistake away from abandonment. How he tracked her social media without permission. How he told her he loved her only when she was quiet. Ian didn't look at her once. I could tell it was the first time someone had truly reflected him back to himself. 2 stories. Same pattern. Different women. And now the judge saw it too. Daniel leaned toward me during a recess. "This changes things," he said. "A pattern of emotional coercion. It gives your case weight that no single story could." Later, when I passed Ian in the hall, he looked rattled. The mask was slipping. He muttered something, a warning maybe, or a threat. But I didn't hear it, because for the first time I wasn't scared of him. Not his voice. Not his words. Not even his memory. He was just a man. A broken man who tried to break others. And we weren't broken anymore. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No rustling of paper. No calls from Daniel. No rehearsed statements echoing in my head. Just silence. I sat at my kitchen table. The same place I had cried over bills Ian had hidden from me. The same place I once tried to convince myself that things weren't that bad. That I was just tired. Or overthinking. I took out a piece of paper. Not for notes. Not for court prep. For closure. And I wrote a letter not to Ian, but to me. "Dear Clara, you tried. You gave everything. You bent until you snapped. Hoping love would feel like softness again. You excused what couldn't be excused. You stayed quiet so things wouldn't escalate. You believed that if you just changed one more thing, your tone, your clothes, your dreams, things would get better. They didn't. And still, I don't blame you, because survival looks a lot like self-betrayal, when you don't have another option. But now, you have one. Tomorrow we don't speak for Ian. We don't speak to Ian. We speak for you. For every time you bit your tongue so hard it bled. For every apology you gave when he should have been the one saying sorry. For every night you stared at the ceiling, wondering if maybe you were the problem. You weren't. I'm proud of you. Not because you left, but because you stayed for so long, and still chose to believe that life could be better. And now it will be. Because tomorrow, you close the door, and I open a new one. I signed the letter, folded it, and tucked it into the book. I once kept beside my bed, the one I used to escape into when things got too loud in my own home. I wouldn't read it in court, but I would carry it. Because that woman, the one who endured, deserved to be seen, even if only by me. In the morning, I wore a navy blue suit. Not black, not gray. Something strong, a color that felt like storm clouds parting after rain. As I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who knew her worth. A woman who no longer needed to convince anyone she was telling the truth. A woman who didn't need Ian's silence to validate her strength. Today, the court would hear the rest of the story. But I had already made peace with it. The real verdict had already been reached in my heart, and I had finally found her. The version of me that survived. The courtroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. The seats were full not of strangers this time, but of people who had stood beside me. Daniel, Marissa, a few quiet faces from the shelter I once ran to, and my sister who flew across the country just to hold my hand. Ian arrived late. Of course. His hair was neat, his suit expensive, his face unreadable. But his presence no longer filled the room. The judge entered. The room fell silent. And then it began. The final arguments weren't explosive. They didn't need to be. Daniel's voice was steady, his words like bricks, deliberate, heavy, undeniable. When it was Ian's lawyer's turn, I didn't flinch. Not when they painted me as emotional, vindictive, or manipulative, because none of it mattered anymore. The truth had already lived in the room long before words tried to distort it. Then came the moment. The judge looked down at the papers, then up at us. This court finds in favor of Ms. Clara Whitmore. Full protection order granted. Financial and emotional damages recognized. Custody remains solely with the plaintiff. The gavel fell. Just once, but it echoed through every version of me that ever felt small. Daniel squeezed my shoulder. My sister sobbed quietly beside me. I stood up not to walk toward Ian, not to gloat, but to walk away, out of that room, out of that story, out of the version of myself who had once forgotten her own name. Later that night, I stood on my balcony. The city lights flickered. Below, traffic buzzed with a life I was finally ready to rejoin. I picked up my phone and opened a blank note. No longer a letter to the past. This time it was a vow to my future. I will never confuse silence with peace again. I will love loudly and walk away quickly when love asks me to shrink. I will never apologize for healing in public. I will never choose comfort over truth again. And I will build a life so honest, so full, that no one will ever again feel like they can take it from me. I hit save, not to remember what I'd been through, but to remind myself of what I'd become. Clara Whitmore, survivor, mother, witness, author of her own ending. And this was just chapter 1.